Okay, it's Sunday, August 9th, I think, yes. And this is my Sunday school lesson. We are in the book of Genesis. We are finishing, we finished chapter 4. We're going to go through chapter 5 and part of chapter 6. So today's going to be a big day. Okay, um, let's catch up. Cain messed up. And so Cain, God um, doesn't punish. He informs us of the consequences because he makes the earth to work a certain way. And when we go against what he has created, there are consequences. Like if you jump off a building, there are going to be consequences. Not because God is mad at you, because he's designed gravity to pull us down, keep us grounded. So if you jump off, there's going to be consequences. And somebody saying, now that you've jumped off, you're going to smash into the ground is not God's punishment. It's his informing, here are the consequences. And the consequences when we disconnect from God and do our own thing. And that's what Cain did. So he says to Cain, these are your consequences. The ground is not going to work for you. This is not going to work for you. These are things that aren't going to work for you because you're choosing to go your own way, to do your own thing. And so all that I've designed to work, if you're cooperating with me, it's not going to work for you because you're not going to cooperate with me. Cain overreacts. Oh my God, everyone's going to kill me. Everyone's going to hate me. And so he says, no, no, I'll put a sign over you so people know that if you bother Cain, you'll have the same thing come back at you sevenfold. So that's supposed to discourage you. Like you might get a fine. If you steal $20 from this, you'll have to pay 7 times as much. And that's like a discouragement. The punishment is going to be 7 times as great as the crime. So Cain's like, okay, but I'm still leaving. And Cain left the presence of the Lord, it says. God didn't drive him. He did drive Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. Get out. But he doesn't drive Cain away. Cain decides, I'm going to do my own thing. This is he establishes a city and he has descendants. And this is a city built on, we don't need God. I don't need you, God. So they they then describe Cain's descendants. And we get to Lamech, who's the seventh from Cain. So Cain begat Cain Jr., and Cain Jr. begat Cain the third. I don't remember their names. And then on all the way down to Lamech. He's the seventh from Cain. And so for 7 generations, they've been living in their own city. And they had talent. They had talent. They could build things of bronze and iron, and they raised livestock and cattle and chicken and all this, and they music, and this was a city. It was a city. So he's saying this is what was going on from Cain on down all the way to Lamech, and it's important that he's the seventh from him because it takes 7 generations for it to get really bad. So this is where we were left off last time in Genesis chapter 4. We're just going to finish chapter 4 and then go on. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, it says, And Lamech said unto his wives. So now, as opposed to male and female, I created you, one man, one woman. I'm going to have 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. Well, okay. Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. This is kind of a rap. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. It's called the Song of Lamech. So he's saying, I, I killed somebody. I might have killed 2 people. And if Cain will be avenged sevenfold, like if somebody don't like it and they come after me, just like if Cain was going to be avenged sevenfold if somebody tried to come after him, then Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Like, I'm bigger and badder than God. So I'll get you back 77 times if you try to come after me for what I did. So they're just wanting us to know that this is what's going on the other side of town. They've created the city, they've created a whole civilization. Now, back over here, it says in verse 25 of Genesis chapter 4, and Adam knew his wife again. because Abel's gone. And she bare a son and called his name Seth. For God, she says, has appointed me another. That's what Seth means. Appointed, like this is God's design here. He's appointed me somebody to take uh, Abel's place, another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So now we're going to go down that generation, that line for 7 generations. Okay. And Seth to him also was born a son, and he called his name Enos. And then men began to call on the name of the Lord. So the writer of Genesis, you know, is Moses, right? He's distinguishing. There are people who built a city based on Cain's philosophy of I don't need God. Because Cain, in his mind, it says he left the presence of the Lord. Like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm not going to let God tell me what to do. I've got to go and get my sweat rag. Okay, I'm back. Hope you didn't miss me. So you've got the whole city built on we don't listen to God. We do our own thing. And now you're going to have a whole line of people who listen to God. This is an important distinction. You've got the Sharks and the Jets. No, Crips and the Bloods. But no, that's not actually what's going on because they're both gangs. You got the opposite. You've got the people who are following after man, the people who are following after the Lord. Because it says, from then on, men began to call on the name of the Lord. So you got a whole group of people who they're calling on Lord. They're trusting God. They are, when they're in trouble, they're saying, Lord, help me. They're calling on the name of the Lord. So you got the Lord people and the men people who are just trusting in themselves. This is an important distinction that the Bible makes. Now, Genesis chapter 5, it says, so let's follow this godly line because we went 7 generations on this ungodly line, right? The line of Cain. That's how many generations we can go down, 7. And see who we produce in the 7th generation of the godly line. So this is the book of the generation of Adam in the day that God created man. In the likeness of God, he made him. So we're emphasizing, remember, God made man in his likeness. And what does that mean? What does that mean? God had, was he dark skin, light skin, brown eyes, blue eyes? Does it mean his physical likeness? In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 10 through 11, Ecclesiastes 3, verse 10 through 11, it says, I have seen the God-giving task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. I've seen what God has given man to do. So I know how the ministry that God has given man, the appointment. This is your task while you're on earth. Verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. So now, if you remember, I keep saying if you remember, like you were in my Bible class, but in Ecclesiastes, this is the one saying it's a time to plant and a time to sow. It's a time to build, a time to tear down. There's a time to be born, a time to die. He's Mr. Balance, right? Saying there's this happening and that happening, and they're the opposites. So that's what he's trying to say. All these things happen. You're not going to live a life where everything is fantastic and wonderful and beautiful, and then our life of everything is trouble, trouble, trouble. There's balance. But he says he's made all things beautiful in its time. So everything that's happening, if you're able to look at it from God's perspective, you'll see the beauty in it. You'll see the beauty in, wow, I'm really glad that, when I know people make me crazy. I mean, I don't want to make you crazy when I say this, but because God doesn't break your leg. But let's say you're not listening to God and you get on your motorcycle and you go out riding and your wife or maybe it's you, maybe it's your husband. People have been telling you, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. I don't think you should have a motorcycle. I'm just making this up. Motorcycles are not evil. But let's say that you've been getting warnings and warnings and warnings. And then there you go. You get on your motorcycle and you break your leg. That's not God breaking your leg. God already told you, here are the consequences of jumping off the building. But it says he'll even make that beautiful. Because you'll look back and go, when I broke my leg and I was up in the hospital, that kind of forced me to start reading the Bible, and this nurse came in and started witnessing to me and blah, blah, blah. And he makes all things beautiful in its time. Like God came in and did this wonderful thing. So he didn't break your leg in order to get you in the hospital so that the nurse could witness to you. Since you didn't listen, decide to jump off the building, he's not going to reverse nature and create and get rid of gravity for 30 seconds and so you can float up. You're still going to hit the ground because God is very consistent. I am the Lord, I change not. So you broke the law that he's created and these are the consequences. Fine. He's still going to make it beautiful in its time. And that's what Solomon had recognized. He makes all things beautiful in their time. But also, this is what I was trying to get to, he has put eternity in their hearts. He's put eternity in our hearts. So even though this is temporary and that's temporary and this is temporary and this, you see this building put up and then it's torn down, he's put eternity in our hearts. Now, here's an interesting concept because we always feel a bit of loss if you've been around for a while and you'll drive by some place where you grew up or you go, oh my God, they tore down that school, or oh wow, that's the store I used to go to. And we feel a sense of loss because he's put eternity in our hearts. And we have something should last forever. Something should last forever. And of course, that's him. Him. He's put something in every man. And we who are Christians know, okay, that's God. That's that longing for God. That's that longing for that one thing that will never go away, you know. And we mourn the loss of this person and then Lauren, oh, you know, Kobe, oh, you know, because it's just shocking to us when this person goes or that person goes, because it just feels like it's wrong because he's put eternity in our hearts and we just have this feeling that something should be permanent. Now he's sneaky because that makes us long for God. Now, people who aren't Christians or who aren't believers in God, um, they try to build monuments to themselves that will last forever. They try to put up hotels and statues and things that will so that long after I'm gone, I want to be remembered. But all those things get eventually torn down because you can't. But that's why they do it. That's why they put their names on things that not that it's evil to put your name on things, but that's the motivation. Really, is to you want to. If you're rich enough to leave an endowment to a library, and we're going to name this after you, and it gives you this sense of comfort that long after I'm gone, the Bill Getty, I'm just making up something, museum will still be here. But it's going to get torn down. Nothing's going to last. But we have that desire for eternity. He's put eternity in our hearts so that so that's being created in his image because God is forever. And we have that same desire for that same thing. Okay. Except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. But he's made it impossible that without him, you can't you can't see the whole picture. We only see that little part that we have, that little time that we're on earth. And without God, you can't grab onto eternity. And in Psalm 42:2, it says, "My soul thirsts for God." Psalm 42:2, "My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God?" So it's like I want God. I'm thirsting for him. I'm longing for him. I want that day when I come and appear from him and I get to finally attach again to eternity, right? Because he's put that in everybody. All right. So he in Genesis 5:1. Wow, that's only one verse. I took 20 minutes. Genesis 5:1. He's saying God made Adam in his image. Okay, in Genesis 5:2, it says male and female created he them, and he blessed them, and he called their name Adam, which just means man. So a lot of times when he says Adam means man, mankind, and the day that they were created. Adam actually didn't personally have a name. Adam is the name of mankind. Eve had a name. Eve. She didn't even have that name until after they sinned and God had said, "You. Oh, by the way, you're gonna have a bunch of kids." What? Yes. Oh, so that's when he named her Eve. And it says, verse 3 of Genesis 5, and Adam lived 130 years. So that the man, but it's really just the name for mankind. Whenever you hear the Bible talking about man, just know they're talking about everybody, male and female. Adam lived 130 years and he begat a son in his own likeness and after his image. So He's saying God created Adam in his image, and then Adam created the son in his own image. He didn't create him, but he gave birth to a son in his own image. So there's two streams of thought. Did he pass on God's nature? Did he pass on his nature? What is he trying to, what is he saying? God made Adam in his image, but Adam gave birth and he transmitted sin to his son. And that, and so sin has come forth. And I don't believe it's the second. I believe it's the first. That we were all created with that thirst for God. We're all created with that, with eternity in our hearts, where we're longing for Him, and that's what He passed on to us. That same. It's like God painted a picture of Himself and put it in us, and then when we removed, if we pull from God, then there's that hole that only God can fill. That's constantly in us. That never goes away. He put His likeness in us, and then when we detach from God, then it creates this hunger, this thirst for something, and everybody tries to fill it in their own ways. That's why people that's why people get lonely and hurt and anxious and all, because we've got this hole inside of us that only God can fill. So I believe that's what it means. Other people say, no, no, it means that He passed on the sin nature to His son. And so I just want to take a moment here to have this little conversation. So you got the two trains of thought. Are we born sinners, or are we born neutral and then we sin? So some people think we're just, because in Psalm 51:5 it says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." So people believe, see, that saying that when you're born, you're already a sinner. Now I have a problem with that. I believe that Adam passed on sinful flesh, that we have the sin nature, the sin tendency just in our flesh. Our flesh is dead, and so it's going to want to sin. But I believe our spirit is born alive to God, and then at some point we sin. Uh, but so what do you do about this? I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. He's saying I was brought forth into this world of sin. That when, because David's saying it's not even my fault. When I was born, there was sin around. There was sin in the world, and of course, I was going to fall prey to it because I have this sin nature in my flesh, and so in sin, into sin. It doesn't say as a sinner, my mother conceived me. I was brought forth a sinner. He says I was brought forth into sin, into a sinful world. That's how I interpret that. Um, now, because David says the opposite in Psalm 139. Psalm 139, 13 and 14. He says, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb, and I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." He didn't say I was a sinner. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. You shaped me, and you shaped me, and I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. So David was bipolar, and he'd have, and I'm serious, days of like, "Oh God, I love you so much, you're incredible," and days of "kill them all, I hate them." So when you read the Psalms, he's very emotional, but it's okay. He just had big days and big lows. So one day you brought me forth in sin, another day when you brought me forth, I was fearfully and wonderfully made. But let's see. Paul says it for me best because he's specifically addressing and thinking in a way that we think. In Romans chapter 5, verse 12 through 14. In Romans chapter 5, it says, "Therefore, just as through one man," that's Adam, "sin entered into the world." Now, this word entered is like someone who makes an entrance from off stage, like it was ready to go on. An actor, when he walks on stage, that's not when he was created. He didn't suddenly, he's waiting in the wings. And then he comes on stage. And that's what this entrance word is like, someone who's waiting in the wings. Sin was just ready. And through one man's disobedience, now sin came on in and said, "Okay, let's go." Sin entered the world. And then death now through sin. So if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, they would have had kids, and they would have had kids, they would have had kids, and Adam and Eve would still be around, really old looking, but they'd still be around. And thus death spread to all men. So, because we're going to read this generation of this person lived and then he died, and this person lived, had kids, and then he died. This person lived and had, and then he died. So death being this new concept that comes as a result of sin, passed on to all men because all sinned. That's why you have to sin first in order to lose that connection with God. I believe we're born connected. So if you had a child and unfortunately it passed or something, that child was still connected to God. Because teaching the other way makes people really crazy. Like, oh no, I had my child, he never got a chance to accept Jesus, so he must be in hell because he's already a sinner. Like, even though he didn't sin, he was just born a sinner, and then now he's in hell because he born connected to God. And then we sin. We just like Adam, we have our transgression, and now we've got to reconnect. We have to reconnect. That's what we do. So he says, but you've got to know that you're sinning. It says, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there's no law. So he says, when the law came, when Moses gave the law and really spelled out what a sin was, like thou should not kill. You should not kill people. You should not steal. You should not covet. You should not. Once he spelled all that out, he says sin was in the world, but people didn't. Doesn't matter. People didn't know specifically this was wrong and that was wrong. It says, "For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there's no law." So if you don't know that's a sin, you're not able to count it as. That's why God has to say, "Don't do that. Don't do." Right. That's why we hear that. But it but unfortunately, it still is a sin to God, even whether it's we are able to count it as a sin, right? And so, even though the law finally came at Moses, and now people knew specifically, see, when you killed that person, that was wrong. Oh, I never knew that. I didn't know you couldn't kill people. So now they know for sure what these sins are. It says, nevertheless, death still reigned from Adam to Moses. So before the law was given, people still died in their sins because they were still sinning. So just because they didn't have a name for it doesn't mean God didn't know it was a sin. And even those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, even if it wasn't that type of sin, because Adam's sin was just bold in God's face. There's only two people. There's God and there's Eve. And there's Adam, right? Well, I guess that's three. But there's nobody else. Adam saw Eve eat the apple. Not it wasn't an apple, but eat from the fruit of the tree. And she dies spiritually right there because she's disobedient. She commits an act that makes her a sinner. And he has to pick. Do I do listen to God and stay on God's team, or do I go on the devil's team? I'll go on the devil's team. So even if it wasn't that kind of sin, where it was just really clear, I am choosing the devil, it's still sin, right? Because we're being disobedient to God. So even those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is the type of him is to come? Because Adam was the first person just to outright disobey God. Remember, Eve was deceived. Nothing about her, there's the type of sin where the devil tricks you into it because he tells you some lie about God. And then there's the type of sin where you're not supposed to do that. You're not being deceived. You're just choosing to do that sin. And so that's what Adam was, the first one who just defied God and knew exactly what he was doing. I'm going to be disobedient. But he's a type of him is to come because Jesus is the first person who obeyed God in everything. In everything. He never did sin. Who never sinned, right? So, who would not sin according to the likeness of Trent. He's the type of him who is to come. Now, in Romans chapter 5, verse 19, it says, for as by one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. So, because if he was disobedient, now he's passing on that same mindset, that same sinful flesh, but still each man has to choose. Each man chooses, and at whatever point, whatever age you are, when you know that you're not supposed to do it and you do it anyway, that's when you cut off, right? That's when you like Cain. That's when you say nope. I'm leaving the presence of the Lord. I'm doing my own thing. Right? Everybody has to make that choice. So by one man's disobedience, we all followed his same example, and we choose to sin, and we cut ourselves off from God. He said, so also by one man's obedience, many will be made righteous. And it's the same thing because of Jesus obeying God. We all make the choice to now accept what he did as our forgiveness. We accept his as his righteousness as ours. We accept it. But each man has to choose that. Even though it's out there for everybody, you still have to choose it. You have to choose it. So just like in the same way you have to choose to sin, and that's when you become a sinner, you have to choose to accept God's forgiveness, and then you've got it, right? And now you're in the family of God. So um, I believe that we are born alive to God. And then it's the sin that makes us a sinner. Like we're not born a sin, like already born defeated. Like, wow, you're just born having lost. I still believe it's the same choice. That's the whole point of Adam and Eve. Look how they're choosing, and we at some point we choose. It can be when you're 2 years old, it can be 5 years old, it can be at some point we know right from wrong, and we go, no, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm my own God. I make my own choices about my life. And then we're Cain, who's like, yeah, I'm doing my own thing. But we can always come back to the family of God. So in Romans chapter 7, verse 9, Romans chapter 7, verse 9, Paul says, I was alive once without the law. So I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, so when I finally understood right from wrong, like it was spelled out, like with Moses spelled it out, thou shalt not murder, the sin in my flesh revived and I died because I chose the wrong thing. So I was alive and then I died. So Paul again, who phrases things more the way we think, is saying, we're born alive to God, but then at a certain point we understand right from wrong, and we choose the wrong, and that's when we decide to be our own gods, and then at a certain point we have to give that up. Nope, I'm going to be a son of God. I'm not going to be my own God. And Cain and the city that he founded, we're going to be our own gods. Seth and his line, they says they're calling on the name of the Lord. We're going to follow after God. So verse 10 of that same Romans, I'll just finish Romans chapter 7, verse 10. And the commandment, which was to bring life, because the purpose of the saying, don't kill, don't steal, is to actually keep me alive. It's telling me exactly what to do so that I don't die, so that and die spiritually. Because death always means separation from God. Right? Spiritual death is when our spirits are separated from God. Once we decide to be our own gods and we disconnect, that's spiritual death. Physical death is when your spirit is separated from your body. But death never means cessation of life. It just means separation. Separation. So and then eternal death is when we're eternally separated from God. So um, when we make that break, we do our own thing. But the commandment is to keep us from doing that. Don't steal, don't lie, don't. But at some point we say, I'm going to go ahead and lie because this can be better for me. And so he says the commandment, which was meant to bring life, I found to bring death because once I disobeyed it, it killed me. Verse 11, for sin, taking occasion by the commandment, it deceived me, and by it killed me. So I was alive and just loving God. And then at some point, don't covet. No, I'm going to covet because I'm going to keep my stuff. Like that rich young ruler who came to Jesus. And Jesus said, hey, just sell all you have and no, I'm keeping my stuff. I'm not going to sell all I have and give to the poor. And so and then you die. That's when, because I make my own decisions about my own life. I'm separating from this person who's telling me what to do. I don't have to listen to him. And that's Cain's people. Didn't listen. In Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 20, it says, the soul who sins shall die. Again, I'm just going on not born sinners. The soul who sins shall die. So you die after you once you sin. And again, die spiritually, they're talking about. Die spiritually. And ultimately your body dies physically because of it, because death's being passed on to everybody. The Son shall not bear the guilt of the Father. So this I'm not because my father sinned, I'm not guilty because of what he did. Seth is not a sinner because Adam sinned. The Son shall not bear the guilt of the Father, now the Father bear the guilt of the Son. Or it doesn't go the other way. You know, your son sinned, so that makes you guilty. It says the righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. So it's since not passed down to us, we make our own choices. Verse 24 says, but when a righteous man turns away from his righteousness and commits iniquity and does according to all the abominations that the wicked man does, shall he live? No, that's when you die. When you can be righteous. And I mean, at 6 years old, at 12 years old, you're right. And then, but at a certain point, you say, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be my own God. Shall he live? All the righteousness which he has done shall not be remembered, because that's when. So you've been good up to whatever age. And then you decide, no, I'm going to do my own life. That's wickedness to God, because we're separating and saying, I don't want you to be my God. I'm going to be my own God, right? Shall not be remembered because of the unfaithfulness of which he is guilty and the sin which he has committed. Because of them he shall die. Because of what you do. So that the Bible doesn't teach you're just born already defeated. You're just born a sinner. At some point you make that choice. Like Paul said, I was alive without the law, and then I died. So I believe when it says that Adam gave birth, of course, if Adam had given birth, that'd be a really great miracle. But Adam brought forth, no, he didn't. Okay, Adam and Eve had Seth, and he was created in his image, just like God created Adam in his image. I believe he means that same. He put eternity in his heart. He put that longing for God. God really creates a picture of himself inside of us. And when we cut that off, when we cut and we split from God, that hole is still there that only he can fill. All right. So are there going to be people who then call on the name of the Lord to fill it? Or are we going to call on ourselves to fill that hole? And that's that we've got two kingdoms. So I'm in Genesis chapter 5. Second part of verse 3 says, and he called his name Seth, which means appointed. Uh, so, and I'm just going to skip down because Genesis chapter 5, verses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 just kind of tells the genealogy. And we get 7 generations. Remember, we had 7 generations leading from Cain to Lamech, the adulterer, the murderer, the braggart, right? Now we got 7 generations from Seth down to Enoch. So Genesis chapter 5, verse 21 says, and Enoch lived 65 years. Now everybody else had kids when they were around in their hundreds and 20, 130. So he lived 120 years and then he had this kid. And then after that, he lived 700 more years and had sons and daughters. Now, interestingly, Enoch, who's the 7th from Adam, Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. So he was young when he had his first kid. He was only 65. And Enoch, though, walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years, and then he begat sons and daughters. So for 300 years, this is the first time that anyone's said that he literally walked with God. Was the first type of relationship that God had with man. He would walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. There's that verse where it says, and God went walking in the cool of the day, and the verb there, as was his habit, basically is what it's saying, that he would always just walk in the garden in the cool of the day, and he's looking for Adam and Eve. Oh, where are you? But he knows what they are. So, because that's their time. We should all have time where we're just walking with God, talking with God. Well, Enoch, that's what he did. Not only did he call on the name of the Lord, but he just spent all of his time walking and talking with God. You could avoid a lot of sin the more time you spend being God conscious, conscious that God is with you all the time. I used to tell people if my mom was tied to me and I'd have to act different because and same thing with you, right? If your mom was, that's why they make parents come to school sometimes. At least my wife did. She was really good at this. I'm sure other teachers would do this. But if there was a kid acting up, she'd say, hi, I need to call the parents. I need you to just come sit in the classroom. And they didn't have to do anything. They just had to be there. Suddenly that kid who was acting up would act differently. Oh, I wonder what's going on. Oh, your mama's here. So, and you know how to act if your mama's here. You know that because you know that she'll hurt you. So the kids would act differently because the mom was just sitting in the classroom. I was all like, just have to sit there. And so, uh, because they had this consciousness, ooh, my mom's going to get me. Well, if we had this consciousness that God was with us, if we, because He is, but we don't act like He is, because even when it says that Cain left the presence of the Lord, and really, God is everywhere. David said, "If I make my bed in hell, you're there." But in their minds, they left the presence of the Lord. They acted like He was gone, and they did their own thing. Well, that's what we do. We forget. But if we could walk and talk with Him, I'm telling you, if you could just get in your car, talk to God, you could at their office, talk to. Now, of course, you have to talk to other people. You can't just be crazy. Excuse me, I'm talking to God. But if you, uh, if we're always just conscious that He's there, and when somebody frustrates us, instead of I'm so if we say, Lord, that's really frustrating, and what do you think I should do about it? And if somebody angers us or something scares us, whew, Lord, that really scared me. What do you think? And we just develop this relationship where we were constantly talking to God, constantly making Him our friend. Our lives would be so different. We make so many different choices. Well, Enoch, he walked with God. He didn't just call on them every so often, because that's mostly we get in trouble. This is because his side of the street. This is they called on God. Obviously, Cain's side didn't. So they called on God. They talked to God, and but that's usually when they were in trouble. And that's who we are. And that's not horrible, but we could have them around so many other times. So people on Facebook, please pray for so and so. Please pray because and here's the situation. Well, I should have been praying for that person every day anyway. Why did we wait till there's a situation? You know, God will put people on our hearts. That's because He wants us to pray for them before the situation comes up. People will occur to, oh, I wonder how so and so's doing. Pray. That's God talking to you. So talk to God about that person. So if we were just more God conscious, we wouldn't have to wait for these special situations to call on Him. Lord, help me. But at least they were calling on Him. On Cain's side of the street, they weren't even calling. They weren't calling Him. We don't need God. We're going to do our own thing. So you got the sons of God on one side and the sons of man on the other, right? So Enoch, he walked before God after he got Methuselah for 300 years. Just walked with God. Again, you might have heard the phrase, walk before me. Walking with God is not the same as walking before me. In Genesis 17:1, it says, when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. That's talking about a lifestyle of like God, like your mom is sitting in the back of the classroom watching you. So walk before me, because you could be conscious that I'm watching you, and walk before me and do the right thing. That's not the same as walking with me, because Enoch said he walked with God. So that's having a personal, close relationship. God will take the other. He prefers the walking with, but at the very least, walk before me and pretend like I'm watching you all the time. Uh, in Deuteronomy 13:4 says, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear Him and keep His commandments and obey His voice. You shall serve Him and hold fast to Him. That's Deuteronomy 13:4. So He's telling us that's how I want you to walk, as though I'm watching you all the time. And not to fear Him, not like, nah, but be respectful of God and what you say and what you do. God's there. So if you and let's be honest, if Jesus was sitting right next to you, there's certain things you would not say, certain things you would not do, obviously. But He is right there. So we can't, So He's saying, act like I'm there. But better than that, talk to me. Let's walk with Him. So that's what Enoch did. Okay, I will just get stuck on things. Genesis chapter 5, verse 23 through 4. And the days of Enoch were 365 years, and anyone that he was not for God. It says so, and Enoch walked with God in Genesis 5:24. And he was not. So he was this the first person who did not die. It says, for God took him. So 7 generations, this person had this person kid, and then he had sons and daughters, and then he died. And this person, and they all lived like 900 years. Seriously, like on average, 950 years. Okay, except for Enoch. He only lived 400 and something years, or 500 years. But then he never did die. God just took him because he just kept walking with God, walking with God, walking with God. Walking with God. He just walked on into heaven. And I've seen saints do that. I've seen people do that who just lived their lives before God and walked and talked with God. And then when they passed, it's like they just walked on into heaven. You know, they just walked on, and we have to think of it that way. They had such a close relationship with God. They loved God so much. They passed. They just got walked right out of their body and walked on into heaven and just kept talking to God and walking with God. And that's what happened with Enoch. Except they didn't find his body. He didn't leave his body like the saints we're thinking of. God just took him, the whole thing. Okay. Now, he's the seventh. So the writer of Genesis, who is Moses, and Moses wrote Genesis while he was in the wilderness because he had 40 years just walking around, nothing to do. So he compiled all these genealogies because that was one of the things that these people did is they kept a genealogy, and he compiled them all, and then God told him how to put it together, and God gave him commentary and the whole thing and explained all this stuff to him. So uh, he's explaining what happened to Enoch. He's saying this is a phenomenal thing, and this is not by mistake. On the Cain side of it, by the time they got to the seventh generation, you've got Lamech, the adulterer, the murderer. By the time they got to the seventh generation, you got Enoch, who walked with God and loved God so much. So he's really, look what happened in seven generations. What type of people that were produced on one side and what type of people were produced on the other. Now, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5, it says, by faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death. And he was not found. So, like I said, they didn't find his body because God had taken him. So, before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. He, every day, and that's how we'd be. The more we talk to God every day. I mean, if you just get into practice, when you get in your car, hey, God, what's up? Like you would if your friend was in the car next to you. If your buddy was in the car, you'd say, oh, let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you about this. Talk to God like that. He wants to be our friend. Hey, God, let me tell you what happened yesterday. Of course, he was there and he saw. But God likes you to tell him stuff. That's it. Hey, Adam, where are you? Hey, Cain, what did you do? Did you just do something? Tell me, talk to me. And so that's how God is. Talk to him and say, oh, Lord, Jesus, yesterday, you know how that person got on my nerves, and this is how I felt, and blah, blah, and I felt this, and it's David, in the Psalms, pour out your heart before him. So we have to establish this relationship with God. Here's where I tell my goofy story, where um, one of my best friends was this girl named Sue Humphreys Thompson, and I would call her up all the time when I was in Bible college, and she was back in LA. And oh, guess what I learned today in Bible college? Or I would write little notes, and uh, I was always, Sue, let me tell you what this teacher said and what that teacher. And the one time I heard the audible voice of God in my life, I was all by myself in this big house that I shared with 12 other guys, but I was the only one there at this particular time. They were all off at work. And the voice said, because I was thinking, oh, I can't wait to call Sue and tell her what just happened today at Bible college. Now, I was fortunate again because I'm studying the Bible all day long and I'm going to church all night long. And I was just in a situation where I just surrounded with the Bible all the time, living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the voice said, I want to be your friend. And so it was like devastating. It was like, I mean, it filled the house, and I was the only one there, and I'm like crying and like, what does he mean? I want to be your friend. And I realized that every time I had a really funny story, every time I couldn't wait to call Sue and tell Sue, here's what happened. Here's what this teacher said. Oh, we were studying. It's like, I want to be that person. I want to be the first person you think of. I want to be the first person that you go to and say, oh, here's what's on my heart. And oh, you won't believe this. I want to be number one in your life. You're studying the Bible and you're studying this history, my history, but I'm not a present, I'm not the first person that you want to talk to. Talk to me about the Bible. Hey, Lord, look what I read here. What does this scripture mean? Ask me about it. I want to be first. And so I did the nuttiest things after that. Um, so I took God out to lunch. I went to Burger King. I remember this Burger King over in Tulsa off of Sheridan Avenue, and I didn't buy him a hamburger, but I got some food and I got a tray and I sat down in a booth and I imagined God sitting across from me and I talked to God like he was my friend. I picked a time like 3 o'clock when Burger King had no other customers in it, so people would not think I was crazy. But I talked to God and I'd say, "Hey, Lord, here's what's going on. Here's what I'm thinking. And yesterday this and that." Like I would if I was going out to lunch with a friend, and I just struck up this relationship with God, and it made me God conscious. It made me really God conscious, so that when I'd get in my car, I'd almost say, "Hey, fasten your seatbelt," because and because I'd start talking to God, like and so that He would become my first thought. This was a wonderful time period in my life, and then God, like once He had my ear, would just tell me things about people, and I remember a time period in my life. Seriously, I would when I came back from Oklahoma and started teaching, uh, God would point out to me kids in the hallway. See that kid? He's going to kill himself tonight. You better still talk to him. There's a specific kid that I went up to and said, "Hey, listen, ask your parents if I can come by and take you out for a hamburger because I need to talk to you." And oh, sure. Now I was his choir teacher, and the parents knew me. So yeah, because this kid didn't have any friends. So the parents were like, "Yay, someone's interested! Yay, showing some sort of interest in my son." Took him out, and I said, "Listen, you're not gonna." But God told me that you're thinking of killing yourself. He's crying, and oh my God, I can't believe it. And because that night he was going to do himself in that night. But God told me that because we were like best friends. There was another girl I remember, this funniest girl, funniest girl, and I won't call out any names in case anybody knows her. Funniest girl, she was the best. The best personality, and she didn't have a ride home from rehearsal one day, so I said, "Oh, I'm going by there. I live just down. I'll take you home." And we were talking and laughing, and I pulled up from her house, talking and laughing, and she's just about to get out of the car, and God said to me, her father abused her. Her stepfather had been molested her when she was little and is still abusing her. And I turned and said that to her. God just told me blah blah blah, and she crying, tears and all. And oh no, I never told anybody that. And how do you? Well, I'm God. God was like my best friend at that point, And you can let cares and worries of the life of the world get in your face, and you don't hear Him as well because you're just so busy with other things. But at that time, nothing else. God and I had been like this. I was like Enoch. I walk with God, and God will tell you stuff. He'll tell you stuff if He's your. But we have so many other thoughts and so many other worries. We do, because and they're all legitimate. But if we would go to God first about all of them, God's not saying you shouldn't worry about anything ever. No, He says, go to me, cast your care on me, and I'll care for you so that you don't have to anymore. He's, if we could just train ourselves to go to God, go to God, go to God, then we'd be like Enoch. We'd be like Enoch, walk with God. Since he was not, for God took him. Okay, Jude says the strangest thing about Enoch. Okay, he says in Jude, there's only one chapter, Jude, in verse 12, he's warning people about he's warning people about certain people who are going to come into your midst, you Christians, and they're really not godly. They are really not godly. They're really wicked and evil. But you got to be careful because they dress like sheep, but there's really wolf inside them. But they dress like we're just part of the sheep. So he says in verse 12, these are spots in your love feasts. They're spots. They're dark spots. You're having these love feasts, and all come over, and we're all going to just love God and love each other. But there's spots. It says, and while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. So they're not even embarrassed about it. They show up, but really they're not trying to love everybody and love God. They're serving only themselves. They are clouds without water. Like, what's the use of that cloud? It has no water in it. It's a cloud without water. That's the purpose of the cloud, is to send down rain. They're clouds without water, just carried about by the winds. They're like late autumn trees without fruit, because that's when in Israel, that's when the tree with, in the autumn, that's when they don't even have any fruit. They're just an empty tree, no fruit, clouds, no water. It says twice dead. That's one of my favorite. Twice dead. They are dead spiritually. They are twice dead, and dead eternally. Uh, Pulled up like a tree that's twice dead, pulled up by the roots, so that they're useless people. In verse 14, same. This is just one chapter. Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men. So it doesn't say that in Genesis. All it just says that Enoch walked with God, and then God took him. But don't forget, God's telling him stuff all the time. So in Jude, I don't know. Now, Jude was one of the disciples that walked with God. They called him Jude instead of Judas, because there was two Judases that were part of Jesus' 12 disciple. So they'll say Judas Iscariot, so it's not this other Jude. Okay. And Jude might have been a brother of Jesus. James was a brother of Jesus, and Jude is mentioned in a certain fact. Now, not Mary had a bunch of kids, but God was the father of Jesus, and then Joseph was the father of the other ones. But anyway, so Jude had this special information for whatever reason. So he says in verse 14, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men. He means these type of men. Also, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly, among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against God. So he's saying, and he had some sort of revelation, that Enoch, who walked with God, prophesied of the coming judgment that actually was going to come on Noah. Not come on Noah, come in Noah's day, that he prophesied that God is coming and he's going to execute judgment. Now, I think it was the judgment. It was that's coming. Now, and no one had ever seen anything like this, right? You got two cities, you got Cain City, and they're doing their thing, they're just doing their thing. And you got Seth's generation, but God hadn't executed judgment like this. They had never seen anything like this. But according to Jude, Enoch prophesied, because God told him, I'm going to bring judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against God. So he's basically saying, this is Enoch prophesying, and Enoch gives birth to Methuselah, and Methuselah to Noah. So that's when the prophecy began, that Enoch said, God's going to bring judgment. How did he know? Because he walked with God. And if we walk with him, if we talk with him, God will warn us of things. Now, I only got halfway through, but that's fine. We'll stop there. We'll stop with Enoch. So you got two civilizations. You got those who follow Cain and we do our own thing, and you got those who follow God. Two civilizations. And when we get into Genesis chapter 6, they start to merge. So they've been separate all this time. They start to merge. And that's when God said, that's it. I tried to keep you separate, but now you're messing up. And that's when God says, okay, everybody out the pool. And he talks about Noah, etc. And so we'll get to that next week. Thank you so much for listening. And those of you who are members of Good Shepherd, on the Good Shepherd page, Facebook page, and starting next week, it'll be on our website. We'll be able to coordinate it all. Please tune into Pastor Grimm. He's always really good. Always really good. Okay? And I'll see the rest of you on Wednesday for our Wednesday night Bible study at 7 o'clock. All right, thanks.